egotistical, so unpredictable, here on the SNL Network.
Yes, that's right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the SNL Network's very special SNL Stories podcast. I am so excited every time we get to do one of these where we get to talk to somebody who has either worked at Saturday Night Live in the past or maybe is even still there, and we get to share in all the wonderful things that they do at our favorite show, Saturday Night Live. And joining me on this journey to talk to all of these great people who work at SNL, it is James Stevens. James, how are you?
I'm great. It's been a little while, John, but looking forward to tonight.
Yes, for sure. I always appreciate you, all the hard work you do to put these things together, James. So great to get to catch up with you. And joining us this time is the SNL production designer at Saturday Night Live. I believe has been with the show since 1985. Did I get that right, Keith? It's Keith Raywood. Keith, how are you?
I have been there since 1985. Yeah.
Wow.
Which makes me quite old, I think.
well, I mean, old, but you still have you're wise. You have a ton of SNL stories that I'm sure people would love to hear. So we're gonna have a lot of fun today talking through all of them. So, Keith, I would love to just ask before we get started on anything, just how are you doing? How's the season going? Are you having a good time in season 47 of SNL?
Absolutely. It's been, well, obviously this was kind of like a comeback year in a certain way, because even though we came back with the COVID protocols and all that we were able to do last season with, it feels more relaxed. I feel more like we're on pace now, less constricted by those rules, and whether or not, there was a certain fear we had of whether or not, on a daily basis, we were going to get shut down. That said, as you know, we did have that issue Christmas, which I'm sure you guys all know about. But it's been a good year, and it feels ever so slightly more normal.
Okay. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, obviously the Paul Rudd was a little bit of a hitch in
I felt more bad for him than anything, I really did.
Yeah, for sure. And at least you guys got him back during the John Mulaney episode. So
yeah, to do his 5 times. Yes, although he had to give up his jacket, I think.
Yes, I have questions about that sketch, so I'm gonna put a pin in that because I want to come back to that a little bit later.
Sure.
But James, I think we did want to get started by asking Keith about how you started with SNL. I mean, going back all the way to 1985. I mean, a lot of people don't know how you got onto the show and started doing all the wonderful things you're doing.
Well, I got out of architecture school, I think, I want to say in 1982, and I was playing in it simultaneously. I was playing in a band, and I wasn't sure which direction I was going in. It was sort of design or music, and the band broke up, so that kind of made up the choice for me. And I went to work on a movie called Easy Money with Rodney Dangerfield, and I had heard about a friend of mine who's actually a very well-known music video director. A friend of mine suggested, maybe you should go, work in an art department on a film. I love your drawings. Your architecture tends to, to me, looks like sets. I've always thought they'd be great sets for a movie. Why not, maybe just go do that while you're trying to figure things out. It really was a kind of, it wasn't that I was in a particular direction. I just thought this was something to do, possibly part-time, possibly not. But I went and worked on that film, and for Eugene Lee, who was the production designer of the movie. And Eugene was also the original production designer of Saturday Night Live. And he instantaneously became my mentor. And from the moment I started working with Gene, it was kind of like became clear to me this is what I was meant to be doing. At least it felt that way. I guess others can decide whether or not that's true or not. So when the movie wrapped, Gene said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to go work on another movie." And he said, "Well, I want you to come meet some people." And literally, we walked down Broadway together to the Brill Building, which is where Broadway Video is, and from the production office on the film, which was up on 56th and Broadway. And we walked down the street, and he walked me up to went up to the 10th floor and went into a conference meeting, into a conference room, and there was Al Franken and Tom Davis and Lorne and Stacey Foster and a few other people that had been at SNL for, and this was important to note. This is when Lorne and many of those people were on hiatus from the show. They had left in 1980. And so they were all working, Lorne was working on other things. He was trying to build Broadway Video, and a lot of people had left with him. And the following day, I was on my way to Atlantic City to design a Franken and Davis television special for Showtime TV. And thus began my television career, which I had not intended either, because I thought I was going to be doing movies. And from that moment on, I had an office at Broadway Video, and I was doing everything that Lorne and his company was doing, like whether it was Simon and Garfunkel or we did a show called The New Show. I'm sure you guys know a little bit about that. And just to not make this go on too long, what happened was a few years later, we were all in a meeting, and Lorne said he was going back to SNL, and looked at me and said, "Oh, and I guess Keith is coming with us." And that was that. I was the kid. It's important to note, I was kind of the kid in the room.
Well, you were the New York kid too, right? You had the sensibility of the city and all that.
Well, I was in New York. Yeah, it's interesting that all this live from New York, and no one came from New York. So, Canadians and Chicago, and yeah, I was a New York kid, and I was a New York club kid too. So I was very much, involved in everything that was going on downtown New York, and all the clubs and bars and restaurants and the bands that were going on at the time. And I myself played CBGBs, so I kind of knew that whole world, which I think brought in a new perspective in a way, because the show was already, when I got there, 10 years old. And in a sense, I was a next generation person coming into the show.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say this, John. I feel like Keith Raywood is a Swiss Army knife. He's musician, he's painter.
He's a Swiss Army.
That's his tagline.
That's very funny.
Yeah, that's your tagline. Like sax, keyboard, if I remember last time we chatted, painter, architect, and eventually, it took you to the path, as you just described, production design. But this is what I really wanted to ask you, just because, people know Eugene Lee, both the theater background, Tony Award winning guy. But like, as a mentor to you, like, can you describe what is the biggest, most important thing you learned from Eugene?
This is a great question, which is why I'm trying to be thoughtful about it.
So you stumped him, James. Already, we're only 10 minutes.
No, it's just that I want to, because I'm not sure it's what you think it is. It would be, but it's to make sure to have more of a career than just Saturday Night Live. To make sure that is not the only thing you're doing. that is not where your life is. And that as an artist, and I use that with a little a, everybody else can make their own decisions again. But as an artist, there's a lot more you should be doing than just that. And, an example of that is my dear friend, no longer with us, my old friend, Hal Wilner, who I'm sure you guys all know about. But Hal had an extraordinary career outside of Saturday Night Live, and yet he was at the show, I believe, before I was. He was there in the early '80s as a music producer, and so that's a really important. I think that's a really important thing, and I think it's across the board, no matter what part of the show you're in, whether you're a cast member or a writer, whatever that is. It's really important to find your way in the business through other outlets. And I learned that from Gene because Gene was always doing theater. Going back to when we first met, I was doing theater with Eugene all the way up until around 1986 or 87. In fact, I even helped him with Showboat. So, I was working with Gene in theater while doing all those television things that we were working on together. And because I was fortunate, it was the right generation. It was the right time. I started at the beginning of MTV and that whole generation, and all those directors, many of whom were friends of mine and still are. I was doing music videos when they first started. I was doing music videos when they started. I was working at MTV. In fact, I've had, in many ways, a much bigger career at Viacom than I did at NBC.
Interesting.
Or a more prolific one in terms of the amount of shows that I did there. And so I learned. I took that to heart from Eugene. You got to, you want to be a designer or you want to be an artist at some time, you've got to be out there doing it all the time and in all kinds of ways. So that's my answer to your question. I hope that helps.
I think it's great. I think it's beautiful. You mentioned the cast, you mentioned writers. The musicians in the band, everybody. They've got these, they're not even side projects. They're equal to, if not as important to the SNL work, I think. Before we go too far down, the timeline here, just circling back real quick on the new show, which is just crazy to think because, people know of it in terms of Saturday Night Live. It was taped. It wasn't live version. Lauren produced it. It wasn't as successful, of course. That was your first entry, I think, into television. Is there anything
I wouldn't exactly
you remember?
It was certainly my first entry into sketch comedy, I think. You could say that Franken and Davis special, I think, but it was it was the first variety show I ever worked on, for sure. And it had a similar to SNL format. It had an incredible cast, a lot of SCTV people, and Buck Henry. And we had an interesting music. There was an interesting music thing. Again, it was 2 songs, just like SNL. It was 2 songs, 2 performances per show, but done a little more. Although it was in the studio, it was a little more music video style in that while it being a live performance, we would build a different set for each number, for each song. And what was nice for me was I got to be the guy to design those sets. That was kind of my job. We'll have Keith do the music.
That's cool.
Which if if you were in the room, it made the most sense. I mean, I suppose, and that was a great lesson for me too. And I understood musicians, and I understood how to lay out a band. I mean, it was just something I by that point already instinctively knew. So that was an interesting show. It really, some of it was really funny. It was sort of a shame that it didn't work out.
Yeah, but of course we got SNL and all the original people back, so I guess it all worked
No,
out.
no,
Right?
yeah. I mean, but I think we only did. I think we only did 6 shows. I think we only did 6 shows, and then that was
Right.
that.
Yeah. Keith, I also had a note from one of our friends, Andy. He wanted me to ask you about Kids in the Hall, the Canadian sketch show. Did you do any work on that show?
In fact, with Eugene, we both went up to Canada and designed the Kids in the Hall together. And
So cool.
we did, I think I did the pilot, which was in the summer, and I did the pilot and the first season. But of course I had to go back and do Saturday Night Live. But yeah, I definitely helped with the startup of that. And that was great. That was a great experience too. And Gene and I did that together. That was a lot of fun.
I mean, you could take the Canadians and bring them into New York, but you can also take the New Yorker and bring them up to Canada. So,
well, I think the feeling is that Lorne sent us up there because, we would understand how to turn that into a show. I mean, basically, the Kids in the Hall were a comedy club improv group for the most part. I mean, I remember going to see them. Is it on Queen Street? I think it is in Toronto. We saw them at a small club. I mean, that was my first introduction to their work. So expanding that into full-on sketches and film pieces like Crushing Your Head and all that stuff. It was easy. In a sense, it was easy. We knew what to do there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I do want to ask you, you mentioned about the New York influence and being, the New Yorker in the room with all these people. And I want to know how that translates into some of the designs that we saw when Lorne and SNL returned in the mid 80s and you joined the team, specifically when it comes to, the home base and the musical guest stage, these iconic stages that we've seen over the years. How did you influence some of those designs?
Well, first year back, I remember Akira Yoshimura, Gene, and I were drawing a new home base. So this was for the fall of '85, and we did I think it was a marquee. Here's the other thing, guys. I've been there a long time, so I actually don't necessarily remember everything.
It's all good. You tell us what everything goes.
You're right.
It's sort of a montage, actually, in some ways. But anyway, I think we did a movie theater as the centerpiece, which was which was a porno theater down the street. By the way, I mean it literally was a porno theater down the street. And we sort of dressed it up a little Art Deco-y in some ways, I think, but that's what it was. And then the idea was to have the house band up on the roof, and they were up above, which I remember Lenny, I think, hated that. But and we put the band up there. That was except for laying out the band and drawing details and stuff, I didn't have a lot to do with the design of that set. I basically understood the concept, and Leo and I pretty much just drew together, and it just, whatever it became. And Gene had brought in the theater idea and so on. So, the movie theater idea and so on. So, and I think we had a band set. This was kind of crazy. We tried this idea with an air-castered band stage that the band would set up on this platform that would float around the studio on air casters, and we could put it wherever we wanted. Actually, even now it sounds like a terrible idea, but we tried that out, and there was this engine the size of almost a small Volkswagen behind the studio that you'd have to turn on and would lift it up. Like they move airplanes with these things, and the idea was to be able to float the band in front of like the home base or somewhere and be able to kind of shoot a more environmental approach to the music and not necessarily a hard set. It didn't last very long. We wound up just, placing it back where it belonged and building a set around it. But the thing was that season kind of went in a blur, and I don't know that everyone thought it went well. I mean, I think there were some really funny things in that show and some interesting people. Certainly quite a few movie stars wound up coming out of that cast.
Some went up in flames.
Yeah, but but several of them didn't last past the season. So I'm going to get to your question. When after the Great Fire, in which only I think 3 people survived, Gene called me and said, "Would you like to?" Now, mind you, I was the art director then, not the production designer. Although in our group, there wasn't a lot of division in terms of that. It was just a title. It didn't seem to have a lot to do with who did what. And he said, "Would you like to design a new home base?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Just do whatever you want, but if let's do an interior this time, because I don't know that the exterior worked that great." And I said, "Fine." And I was hanging out, as were several people, at a club on 14th Street called Nell's, which was a place that Keith McNally, who owns Balthazar, and the Odeon, which was a restaurant everybody used to hang out at and go to all the time. Keith was the owner of that with Nell Campbell, who was Little Nell from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Rocky Horror Show, and it was one of the hottest clubs in town, and we used to go there quite a bit. And it had this distressed elegance to it, was its vibe. Kind of, the sofas had purposeful rips in them, it seemed, and there was, the walls, instead of being painted a bright ochre, they were distressed, and there were water stains coming down them, all of which, of course, was essentially set design. And I decided that I was going to base that next set on that kind of feeling, on that room, on what that was about. It wasn't specific to any part of that club, but the overall feeling was going to be like that. And that's the set you saw in 1980, the beginning of the 86-87 season, that then there were paintings added to that set and so on. And I'm not sure how long it lasted, but I think it was about 5-6 seasons at least.
James, do you remember?
Yeah, no, that sounds right. I remember the paintings got added, and it was kind of like the beginning of the double door kind of era.
It was the beginning. It was indeed the beginning, which I found at a New York salvage company. There was a beautiful fireplace, and those doors, and these beautiful oak pilasters and stuff, and a chandelier, which I had been told had come from the Helen Hayes Theater. So that was and then I think the first music set was similar to that, and then we started, just kept moving on from there. But basically, I that was my first major set for the show, really, I guess.
It's so awesome. And what about today's? Like, obviously, the Grand Central theme that we've seen in the show has been around probably since the early 2000s. So, like, the longest time that we've had a
Absolutely. I
consistent
mean,
set
I
design.
think that set's
Yeah.
become so iconic that even, believe me, I've suggested that we change it over the years, and
Okay.
it's almost like that's just, yeah. I think Lorne can't see his way to it, and it's just become so identifiable. I mean, that's what happens when something is just there long enough. It's just going to happen that way. So,
Well, if you could change the current home base to anything, do you have any ideas that you could share with us that you would change it to?
well, I think now that Pete and Colin have bought themselves a ferry, I think the Staten Island ferry could be a kind of a, the whole idea of coming to the island, that's what the train station thing was about. The sort of like arriving in New York. I mean, there's something about traveling into the city that seems to be a nice idea, but the ideas are always about some sort of something urban, something New York. We did the Brooklyn Bridge, and that lasted for a while, and we were underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. I think it's always something like that. The answer is no. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head because I haven't been allowed to entertain the notion.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. I usually don't waste. I usually don't waste my mental space on things I'm not asked to do at the moment. Asked to do.
Yeah, but that's what podcasts are for. We push you to think of it.
Yeah. My instinct is to do something more. My instinct is to do something more contemporary, something more modern. Or even if that would revolve around like the train tracks that have been turned into a park, and all these restaurants and bars are underneath it down in the meatpacking district. Just for some reason, I can't think of the name at the moment. But that's just because we're talking. But there's always something more contemporary, something that's happening now would be where I would, and what that architecture might be is something I would probably lean towards, or at least start looking at. But I think the Grand Central thing is going to be with us for some time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair. So outside of the home base, I have to ask, what is it like, SNL, to draw or sketch your set and see it completed in a matter of days?
There's nowhere like it. There's no show like that. I mean, we literally are now building, and I'm watching on my iPad right now. I have a closed circuit camera to the studio. I'm watching, sets starting to go up, and that we drew at midnight last night. So, and nothing is done like that. It's it's instant. So you only get one chance, really. It's I liken it to when I remember being in art school, like gesture drawing. You have to just, it's just the arc of your hand, and then that whatever that first instinct is, that's what we're going with. The only production meeting we truly have is Wednesday night. We have there's read through. I mean, I'm sure you guys know about this, but there's the read through is on Wednesday, and then producers and writers and the host, they go into Lauren's office, and it's decided which, let's say, dozen pieces we're going to do out of the 35 we just read. And right at that moment, when the picks are made, everyone comes into our office, and on a drafting board is a map of the studio. And the director comes in, and we place what sketch is going to go in what part of the studio. And with that, the writers are literally lined up behind us, one by one or two by two. They tell us what they were thinking and where the sketch is going to be. We tell them where it's going. And any ideas they have, or prop ideas they may have, or so on. They do the same thing with costumes, same thing with hair and makeup. It all happens late on Wednesday night, because at that moment, it's a sprint to the finish line.
Right.
There are changes throughout, of course. I mean, we've already made several changes today of just like moving a set around, or we're going to change the size of something or whatever. But that's how it's done. So it's just this instantaneous. We just do it instantly, and you get used to it, you know. And so the answer, James, is that it's a fantastic way to do things, but you really have to have it in your. You have to have. There has to be something about this show in your DNA that makes you capable of working that fast and being that sure that this is what you want to do. You know, that's people. The people who work here are able to do that, but not everybody's able to do that who works in our business, I think.
Yeah, I think that the part that I find, and obviously all this is so fascinating, I think the part for me that always intrigues me is the process of a writer, writes a sketch, you go through read through, it gets picked to move forward, and then the writer is, they come to you and they say, okay, here is my vision. And then I love hearing, from you, Keith, it's like, how many times do you have to tell a writer, your vision is crazy, we can't get this done? Or is it like, oh, I got to double down on, like, I want to know what's the rate of approval here towards the writers?
I bet it's far more than you would imagine it is. We try to do anything and everything they ask for.
Wow.
If they want an exploding whale, which we did, we're gonna do everything we can to make it. It is rare indeed, and I honestly can't think of it. I honestly can't think of anything where we said, "Well, we can't do that." It's just
amazing.
But that said, I think it's because within a short amount of time, I think the writers understand just how much of the envelope can be pushed. I mean, Streeter and Mikey are always, it's almost, for the first few years with them, it became like a running joke of like, Streeter coming and saying, okay, I want to see if you guys can do this. It almost became like, a dare. But everyone's aware of like, no one wants to waste time. We want to be able to accomplish what we can. And it's our job to actually tell them how we think we can do something. Not, they may have an idea, but it's our job to possibly say, well, we can't do it exactly like that, but maybe we can do this and you're going to get, something the same.
I love that.
How does curious in the timeline that you sort of just described, how does a cold open that is written late factor into the scenario?
It used to be, I think, the last presidency had a big effect on us getting cold opens way later than we used to.
I'm sure.
I like how you said that. Yeah.
Like, because even if we read a cold open on Wednesday, it was a really good chance that something was going to happen on Friday that was just going to, suddenly the huge set for the Senate chamber that was already built gets loaded out, and we're now at Mar-a-Lago or wherever we are.
Keith, you needed Trump's itinerary mailed to you every single day, so you knew what the new set would be.
But I think it also because we sort of get used to it. We laugh about it. It's like Colin's writing a new cold open, and it's 11:00 Friday night. So tell the shop they're coming in tomorrow, and so on. Unless it's the Oval Office, which we always have in the building.
So I think that, saying all that, one of the big topics of conversation that we've had on the podcast this season has been about Please Don't Destroy, and what they've done with their office and all the pre-tapes that we've seen from them in terms of what we've been describing as like their sandbox that they get to play in. And I find it so fascinating that you're describing SNL in terms of the writers come to you and you try and make their vision happen, because I think a lot of the fans naturally assume that SNL is a sandbox and there are limitations towards what you can do in a sketch environment compared to, going outside and filming a music video like you've done so many times.
Well, there is, and yes, that's true, but the work that's done, the film pieces, which now have also become more complicated and take up a lot of what used to be rehearsal time. Now the cast have to take off, and we're building in another studio right now just to do film pieces. Let me answer your question, or let me enter into what you're asking in a different way. I'm friendly with and run into a lot of writers who used to work on the show. Still, I spend a lot of time in Los Angeles when I'm not at SNL, I see writers and I have gotten this for many years. Of being told, you spoiled the hell out of us. Nowhere's like what you guys do. We're not allowed to do that anywhere else. If we have an idea, it has to be vetted, it has to be drawn, it has to be costed out, it has to be approved, and so on. We don't work that way. If you have an idea, we just build it.
It's amazing.
And writers get to walk it. You asked the question what it's like. I think James asked what it's like for me to draw something and see it built. Well, that's exactly what happened with my first situation with Eugene, was working on Easy Money. Was he asked me to draw a set in my first week or few days of being there. He asked me to draw a set and he left the studio. And when he came back, I had finished drawing it, and he took the drawing off my drafting board. And he said, and I said, "Where are we going?" And he said, "We're going uptown to the studio. We're building this tonight." And here I was, this guy who had been in architecture school for 5 years, and and everything I ever drew was just academic at that point. And here I do a drawing, and the next thing I know, by the next morning, there are walls standing up. So for writers on our show who just had an idea on Tuesday night, they get to walk in the studio and see, a throne room, or, a throne room, or a subway station, or a warehouse, or whatever the sketch might need, or an exploding whale. They get to see that happen out of their mind's eye into our interpretation. They get to see that instantly in front of them, and that doesn't happen anywhere else either.
Yeah, that's so fulfilling for everybody. So really, really cool. You did bring it up before, so I want to talk to you about this Five Timers Club set and the sketch that we got in the Mulaney episode. And obviously, for SNL fans, the seeing that sketch was extremely iconic. I believe that we were supposed to get one during the Paul Rudd episode, but obviously that was impacted. So I would love to hear about the set design of doing something like the Five Timers Club, given how meta it is. It's all about celebrating the show. So what goes into producing a set like that?
Well, I actually am the one. I drew the first. That's always been I was the one that drew the first one, so I was the one that drew
Tom
the
Hanks
Five
one.
Timers.
Yeah.
Tom Hanks. Good.
And so the idea was to make it a kind of like English men's club. It's that color green and the wood and the books and, leather sofas and, it was supposed to be, yeah, that's really what it came from. It was supposed to be like a private English men's club was the vibe. And it's never really wavered from that. I mean, I kind of changed the last one we did. The one we did with, maybe it was Tina or Drew. I'm not sure who, but I honestly don't remember. But I remember because it was women. It was a woman.
I think it was Jonah Hill's one.
Well, there was one where I made it more. I made it a velvet. I brought in a velvet couch instead, and I kind of like. I just wanted to soften it up a little bit. Because there were now women entering into the picture. I mean, literally, it was just changing a little bit of furniture, but it was to make it a little less leathery. So that's what you saw the last two versions. I'm not sure how many times we've done it. Well, it's only been about 4 or 5 times, right, that we've actually done it.
Yeah, there was Tom Hanks, Timberlake, Jonah Hill, and then I believe John Mulaney were the 4 times you've done it. I was pretty sure. Because I think the Jonah Hill one was where you brought, you had Tina and Drew and Candace there.
Absolutely. Okay, so that was, you're absolutely right. It was because now there were ladies.
All the ladies.
Club. Yeah. Interestingly enough, it's been done now in 3 different parts of the studio. It's not even always been in the same place.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. It's done it. Yeah, the first one, might not mean anything to you, but the first one was done in the area we call stage 5, which is up against the balcony. And then there was one with Danny Aykroyd in. I think that was the Justin Timberlake one, was done in an area against the balcony that has historically been called the Cane. And the reason it's actually area stage 4, we call it, but called the Cane because there was a Citizen Kane sketch done there.
Wow, yeah.
Many years ago, and so Leo and Gene always called it the Cane, so we still do. And then the other 2 were done in front of stage 3, facing the audience. So it's actually, that set's been moved around and changed in size a little bit, but the overall feeling has always been the same.
Okay, can I make a pitch for you for something for the next 5 Timers Club set?
John has a request. Yes.
Sure.
Okay, I have a request. Can we get a photo of Buck Henry somewhere in the set who's no longer with us?
Oh, what a great idea. What a great idea.
Yeah, so he's the only member of the 5 Timers Club who's no longer with us. Would love to get like a little memorial or photo of him on the wall somewhere.
I will, you know what? That's a great idea. A little embarrassed to have not thought of it myself, but that's a really good idea. We will
need to talk more, Keith.
You're absolutely true. Buck should be in there.
Okay. Well, we can make this happen next time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that note is incredible because it's the meta-ness of it met by the fact that these sets today are so kind of, elaborate and have intricate detail, where I think, Keith, when you first came to the show, that was, is it safe to say it's become here lately more elaborate?
I mean, the beginning of the show, there's several things at play for why. And by the way, when I was talking about something about, when I said something about another home base and something about that, the high line is what I was trying to, the word I was trying to, get to. But any case, in fact, I already did a set that sort of incorporated it, which was for the American Comedy Awards, but whatever. So when the show started, it was a more classic sketch comedy approach, it was very theatrical. They were even, in season 1, I think they were painting paintings onto flats. I mean, it was almost like it was not more far along than the Honeymooners, and I think it was intentionally meant to be theatrical that way. And then even in the beginning, of course, I can think of those sets, but if you look at the samurai sets or any of those at that time, they're pretty rudimentary. Everything that's needed for the piece is there: a front door, a window, a counter, a sign. But they're fairly, straightforward without being highly detailed in any way. I think as time went on, the show evolved not necessarily internally, but because of what expectations through media had become. People expect more when they're looking at something. And the best thing about comedy for us is for it to be in as real an environment as possible, so that your eye and your thinking about where this is taking place is not interfered with, in any way. You're not trying to imagine what this would actually be like in a suburban home or in a wedding venue or something, or a palace. That should just be a given. And that developed over time as entertainment became more and more visually complex. I think what I'm trying to say is we just went along with that in a way of wanting to be more film quality sets, because that's what the show deserved and required. Of course, I'm saying that within the context of how big we can make them in the studio, because the average set is like 12 feet deep and 16 feet wide. I mean, that's pretty standard for the most part, and how much we can do in 3 days. Back in the day, there was like 2 prop houses in New York City. The access to things was very little. See, the first few seasons, every couch was beige. There were only 2 couches. They were both beige. One was a 2-seater, one was 3 seats. And that was kind of all that was available. They used to go to a place called Kenmore to rent everything. Now I very much have a lot to do with the dressing of the show. It's kind of a part of the design that that's very important to me. So, and it's kind of how we sort of divide things up. And Leo, for instance, I know who Leo Akira Yoshimura is. He's also a very famous actor on the show, it seems.
Sulu.
Yeah, Sulu, exactly. Yeah, I joked with him when Bowen came onto the show, actually. I said, well, there goes your job, dude. Like I deal with the dressing of the show, of the propping of the show, things like that, because I felt that was such an important part of what every set looked like. It's one thing to draw something, but how it what the wallpaper was, what all of those things were, seemed to be very important, and I was really happy to get really involved in it, and I still do that to this day.
That's awesome. So Keith, I do want to ask you about the 40th anniversary of the show, which obviously was a huge night for fans of the show, but obviously for everyone who's been there for so many years to celebrate everything that you've accomplished. Do you have any interesting stories from that night, or even just the production of the show that week, with returning to some of these old sets that you've designed? Anything like that you would be interesting to share with the fans?
I'm trying to remember the sketches that were in that. Didn't we do like the Californians or something? It was an odd choice of anything to do.
Absolutely.
I think.
Yeah, you did the Californians. You did Wayne's World in that one.
Right. Well,
you did Celebrity Jeopardy.
You guys know about that whole thing when we did that exhibition, right?
Yes,
that was
the
kind of
SNL exhibition.
the SNL exhibition, which kind of was happening at the same time, or the creation of that was happening at the same time. So there was that notion of like, what were really iconic pieces? The thing is, there's so many, and they're so era based, and they're so cast. What cast when that all came from. Wayne's World seemed to be obviously, just an obvious choice, and having Mike and Dana do that. But I wish I could tell you, except reconfiguring the studio so that we had bleachers that came. It wasn't just the balcony anymore, but literally stepped down the bleachers all the way to the floor, and having to expand the home base all the way across, and creating a much bigger environment. I think we had Kanye on one side as well, didn't we?
Yes,
Isn't Kanye in that?
Yeah, Peace and Time.
Yeah, so I remember having to come up with that, and how that was going to happen. He was kind of like he was practically on his knees or something doing that number with a ceiling over him. John, I can't really say anything in particular except that it was just a huge project of the heart for everyone that was involved in it. And I think those of us who were still at the show and still working on the show, we're in a very different situation it was very different for us than the people who were coming back, either to appear, but also like it was such a black tie event. What I remember mostly was the party was incredible at the, and I had to get really involved. I had to get very involved in the party aspect of it as well. Was getting sent to the plaza, and I'm trying to think of the name of the party planner who did that. I think it was David, somebody or other. He was terrific. But basically, I had to vet everything that was going on for that too simultaneously.
This is I didn't know any of this. Okay, so please tell us more about that.
Well, there was an amazing after party at the Plaza Hotel. That was incredible.
For sure, but how were you involved in design for that party?
Well, what rooms we were going to use, how they were going to be set up, where the banquettes were going, all of those things had to come through. I had to okay them, and then say to the producers, I think this will be great. Just because I think there's that trust factor. Was like, well, has Keith seen it? And that would be, yes, he has. Oh, good. Okay. So it was just that it was a huge event for everyone. And of course, Prince played.
Yeah.
Or as Jimmy Fallon likes to tell the story, suddenly there was a purple cloud, and Prince seemed to, without touching the ground, float to the stage. It did seem quite like that. It's a great story, but it was a lot like that. It was amazing. And Quest, and the Academy Award winner Questlove was the DJ.
So cool. Yeah, you need to put that on your IMDb that you you designed the after party for the 40th, because that's just like, it's the party of at least the last decade.
I would say more that I edited and approved the design more than I did it. I wasn't that I did it all, but I had to be very involved in it. No, his name was David. I just can't remember who that. He's a very well-known party, person in New York who designed, his company was brought in to do it. But flowers, all of that. It was, flower design, where the food was going to be, and creating a stage, making sure there were instruments on the stage so that anyone could come up and play whenever they want, because that was totally unplanned. Was, right. Who would be playing and how many guitars there needed to be, and so on. So inevitably, no matter what I've ever been involved with at SNL, there seems to be always some, figuring out where all the instruments is going to go has always been something I've had to somehow get involved in, or always been asked to be involved in.
Well, and on that note, because you mentioned music and you mentioned, Kanye, I think last time you and I chatted, this maybe came up, but there's that thing with the musical guests where it's either on the stage and it's SNL, or they come in, the musical guest, the artist, and decide to do something completely different. And I presume that you are involved in that aspect.
Every week. And it really is a combination of being up to the artist and who that artist is. Nowadays, it's more and more likely that someone has an idea because they're presented now with they present themselves now with a more overall visual that's part of their personality, as opposed to, when we have Springsteen or the Foo Fighters, sadly. I was just thinking about them this week. That's why. But when you have a band like that, they're usually not as involved or not as concerned with changing the visual presentation as much as just they're on SNL and they just want it to look like they're on SNL and they're just going to play. But every week I get drawn. Every week I get there'll be concepts and ideas that are floated, let's say 2 weeks in advance, or a week, 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. And I have to weigh in, do I think it's possible? Do I think it'll work? What's not going, and so on. And then I have to make, my suggestions on how to make this better or how not to, if I think it's okay, or whether or not I think, no, we can't do this. I usually have an issue with trying to reproduce a music video look.
Right.
I always think that's problematic. One, because it seems like an unoriginal idea because you've already done it in a music video, and also because we have a live show, and presenting a live show and shooting a live show is not the same thing. It's not, music videos, generally speaking, are single camera, and having done not only a lot of music videos, I mean, I even did Drake's Way Too Sexy video recently, which had 14 sets and took two 20-hour days to shoot. We can't do things like that on our stage. And, and it's a very small, it's a relatively small stage too. It looks bigger on TV than it is in for real. So that's the only time sometimes whenever I hear that concept, it's like, oh, well, they want to do something like their music video. I'm like, let's try and come up with something that's a little more live. Okay.
That makes sense. We do. This is a good time to bring in a question from one of our patrons, Casey. Casey wanted to ask you, Keith, does production design for a music video run on a tighter schedule sometimes than SNL's notorious 6 days to air schedule? Is that ever possible?
I don't think anything's tighter than our schedule.
That's what I figured.
Based on the video, I mean, I don't think I've ever worked longer than 3 weeks on a music video, but that depends on, the Drake video was really fast, but I think we did that in 14 straight days, something like that, from beginning to end.
Wow.
And shot in 2 days. But no, nothing is tighter than SNL. I mean, because the writers meander in on Monday and in Monday afternoon, and there's usually a pitch meeting. Well, this is the way it used to be. I'm not sure everybody's coming in these days. It seems everything's a little more remote right now, but the classic, the way it was everybody would come in, or the writers would come in Monday afternoon, and they'd have a pitch idea. They'd meet the host and they'd have a pitch idea, and they pitch ideas. Then they would go and write Monday night to Tuesday, and they'd flesh out in another pitch meeting on Tuesday. And then they would write and write. And Wednesday, we would all sit down at around 4 o'clock or 4:30 or something and read 35 scripts. And then, I've already told you what happens from that moment on. That's when that's when the art departments and all the technical people come in, is on Wednesday. Okay. Because that's when we know, that's when our job starts. That's when we know, what we're going to be doing. And I can't imagine there is no other show that's done on this scale, in 3 days. It's just, it's extraordinary. And that's, because the machinery that we have is like nowhere else. I mean, you couldn't do this. You were asking, you mentioned that the show didn't look like it did like it does now back in the past, but it has grown, and it has grown organically. It's not that the writing made it do that. It's just that it's the product of having all these people, and they've been here for a long time. And we just know how to do it. We're the machine. The cast, I've always laughed. The cast stays the same age. And generally speaking, there's a new group of writers that come in, and they're all the same age, but we get older and older, and we're still doing it. And by doing
like the administration or the school principal.
But because of that, we, for us, it's just, it's all shorthand between each other. It's second nature to all of us. We just know how to get it done. And you couldn't build that from scratch now, And again, it wasn't the show that Lorne had first produced in 1975 or, even by 1978 or 79. It was different then. It was smaller.
Right. Keith, can I rapid fire a few non-SNL questions to you about some of the other projects you've worked on?
Sure. I'm amazed you know any of the other things I've worked on.
All right. Well, here's something that's sort of related. I would love to hear about what you did and how was Miley Cyrus and Pete Davidson's New Year's Eve special this year.
Oh my God! Did I not think that? I didn't think that was the one you were going to go for. That's very.
We have to start there. Yeah.
That was not what I thought you were going to ask. That was a lot of fun. I love Miley. Okay, so here's a crazy part of that project. Well, first of all, that was Lorne and Lindsay Shookus, who's one of the producers at SNL, and she's kind of the head of she's the head of the talent department as well, really involved in all of that in the booking of the show, and asked me to. Lorne was going to produce a New Year's Eve with Miley, which was just, that was mind-boggling to me, even just to hear that. I was like, really? He wants to be in Miami for New Year's Eve? Okay. So they asked me if I would do that, and I said, of course I'm going to do it. And then they brought in Den of Thieves, a production company that I've worked with in the past. I actually designed a VMAs with them at one time, and I've known Jesse, whose company that is. And so there were a lot of people involved, but there were people involved outside of SNL, and SNL people. I knew them all. So they asked me to do that. Flew down to Miami, looked at a few locations. The first being a house on Star Island that everyone kept calling the Scarface house, even though I think in reality it's not where Scarface was shot. It was just where it might have been based, or maybe the exterior had been used. And we went and scouted that. And the idea was a much smaller idea. With Miley, I just decided I would build the stage over the pool, and there would be the bay behind her. And perhaps I thought like a really cool boat should pull up, and there could be a band on top of that or something. So it was just kind of having a few ideas, but we just realized straight away there was not enough room for all the things you need to do a television show, meaning there was no room for the trucks that you would need. There's no room for all the crew, catering, bathrooms. I mean, just basic things. So that idea went away. And then we found another location nearby that was a rather exclusive yacht club on the causeway that had a really nice view of Miami Beach behind it. Not Miami Beach, of Miami, of the city of Miami. And it was, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if there were several oligarch yachts that were parked there because they were they were huge. They were amazing. And there was a kind of empty field next to it. And so my thought was, this is where we need to do the show. I want to build an outdoor night. I want this to be like an outdoor nightclub, like the Trocadero, like the old Trocadero, which was an indoor club in Los Angeles, but it was meant to seem like you were outside. I said, let's just do this really cool outdoor nightclub, and we'll do the stage for Miley. And so I drew that all up and made a few changes, and then we started to build, and we built it. We were building it, and I built it in Los Angeles, and it was already trucked in. And then, if you remember, the way that how we had that truncated show due to COVID Christmas, there was this COVID outbreak thing, and we. I'm sorry if the story is taking too long, but it's very interesting. Was that the trucks pulled up to the venue, and our permits got pulled right at that moment. The city of Miami pulled our permits right at that moment, and citing COVID. Although I have a feeling it was a little more politically motivated than that. At least I think it might have been, but. Whatever the reasoning was, it was, what are we going to do? And the producer said to me, we're going to Telemundo. I was like, what are you're kidding me? I said, no, we're going to Telemundo. It's 10 miles away or something like that. And it's the end. And, that's Telemundo is NBC and Comcast. And we're going to put it in the parking lot. I said, well, you need to get me an aerial. And the trucks are on their way. I was like, well, you need to get me an aerial of what this looks like, because I need to know where we're going to place this before they start unloading the trucks. So I got that. And within 20 minutes, I had a new plan for where everything we had built was now going, and it was going in a parking lot at Telemundo Studios. And from that moment, it was, how were we going to make this look the same? Which, of course, it couldn't exactly, since that view of Miami was now gone. But I then brought in flatbed trucks with 25-foot palm trees that were live trees, and had to build cinder block planters around this entire set, and cover it and basically to a whole line of palm trees, so that the one thing you wouldn't see was the studio buildings around you.
Right.
Anyway, it all went off, and it was great. And I think, without me telling you the story, you probably wouldn't have known that it wasn't done exactly as planned. But it was crazy, that one. It really was. And of course, there really was a COVID thing, because it wasn't on a daily basis. Almost someone, was coming down, was testing positive. And we're tested every day just to get on the lot and so on.
I did ask about this because honestly, I feel that it was wildly successful. I just think that a lot of people have tried.
But it was going to be it was going to be a different show. And there were other people involved. I know Miley sang "Heart of Glass," but she was going to sing that with Debbie Harry.
Wow.
and Billy from Green Day was going to be there, and they were going to do a number together on a separate stage. There was going to be another stage, and so on. So there was a lot of changes on the fly had to be made. But I thought it would, my favorite thing was designing that bottle where the cork came off, and my countdown clock being a champagne bottle seemed fun. And now I think Miley was the one that was really excited about that. I think it might have been her idea. I think I might have had a champagne glass with a olive in it to start or something, or a martini glass, I mean. But anyway, that was a lot of fun. It was a great show. I mean, it was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, I hope you get to do it again next year, because
there are rumors.
Okay, got it. For sure. We'll look forward to it. Yeah, so thanks for sharing that. I don't think a lot of people who watched it would have known all that stuff. So that was awesome. Okay, so a couple of things I did want to ask you about in your career. Obviously, you've done a lot of work on 30 Rock, and there's a lot of crossover between fans of Saturday Night Live and fans of Tina Fey's sitcoms. So do you miss working on that show, having that also running at the same time as SNL? And, how was that during the process?
I loved doing 30 Rock. I jumped off the show I jumped off the show as a daily participant after this first season, because basically there was really no way for me to really do an episodic and SNL at the same time. And there were the other things that I was also I was doing a lot of other shows at that time too, but more one-off Viacom like specials, which, doing it episodic, at least for me, is not always the most exciting thing, because you kind of just, once the initial thing is done, you're sort of just going along, and there are not a lot of new sets each week. You sort of, you know what I mean? There was there was the studio, the writer's wing, her apartment, Jack's office, which was really important to me. But all those things, I think once I had done all those sets, I think there were only maybe, the rest of the show was mainly me shot over the next, 7 seasons were shot, maybe only 15% new sets after that. So I was, but the beginning of it was fantastic. Tina and Marcy Klein asked me if I wanted to do a pilot, and I said, absolutely. So we did this pilot. We shot that mostly on location, except for Jack's office, which, and I'm just talking about the pilot. We shot that mostly on different locations, and then Jack's office was a studio build, but it was meant to look like it was his office in renovation. So it was mostly like a building site, with sheetrock walls and something. It wasn't what you wound up seeing, once in the arc of the story it had been done. And I think the thing that was interesting about 30 Rock was that it was sort of happening under the radar at NBC, because there was a Aaron Sorkin a story of a sketch comedy show being done, something in Studio
60, yeah. Studio
60 or something. And I think my sense was that the network was just way more invested in that. It was like an Aaron Sorkin show, and it had an all-star cast and things like that. So we did our little pilot, and it was funny, and it was great, and it was not. I don't know that it was meant for air, but it got picked up. So I think it must have been in May. So I started designing it for Silver. We built, the entire thing was built at Silvercup Studios, and in Studio A, Studio One. I'm not sure what they call it, One or A, which I hadn't worked in since a Cyndi Lauper's True Colors video I shot there. That was the last time I actually had worked. That's the last time I actually had worked in that particular studio. And the idea being that it was meant to look like the hallways of Studio 8H and the studio and our studio, miniaturized, but it was meant to have the same feel as the SNL studio. And then we had another stage to do the writer's wing and the elevator bank. And those, I think, and then another studio for Jack's office. And that studio was interesting to me because I had done my first commercial in that studio, like back in 1985 with Bob Giraldi as the director. So I actually remembered it was an insurance commercial. So I was kind of like, it was kind of fun for me just to be back at Silver. I mean, I'd been at Silvercup since then, but it was like, I couldn't help but think how interesting it was for me to just be building in these different studios. But I basically started drawing that show, and I had this lovely wonderful art director gentleman, and I basically just walked around walked around 30 Rock with a tape measure, basically measuring the size of, the elevators and doors and hardware, and basically copying the building I had been in for years. And so, when we finished construction, what I thought was really great was I walked into the studio set, and two things happened that both made me happy and made me laugh, which was one, where Marcy Klein had a door to what was her kind of lounge area at 8H. She walked straight up to it and opened the door, and it was just a brick wall, actually, right there. But she thought she was going to find her office in there. And then I saw Lorne leaning against the wall on a cell phone as if we were back at 8H. And I thought, okay, everyone's comfortable. Everyone thinks they're home. So, and I think just I think people honestly believe that 30 Rock was shot at 30 Rock.
Right.
And which, of course, would be ridiculous. You can't shoot an episodic television series in an office building. But, so I felt it was a real success at that.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So really great job. My last question that I wanted to just cover with you from some of the other works that you've done is I noticed that you did work on Justin Timberlake's Sexy Back music video, which I have to say is a personal favorite of mine, and obviously one of the biggest songs of that time. So any memories from doing that?
God, that does sound, the way you said that, it sounds like forever ago. And I think it probably, what was that, like 16, 17 years ago? Something like
2006.
That?
So
yeah,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I just would love to know any memories of shooting that and working.
Oh, that
Justin.
that was a great shoot. It was shot entirely in Barcelona.
Wow.
I built almost all of it at this Telefonica building in Barcelona, which we used almost essentially as a studio space. And I had a crew from Spain, South Africa, France, Italy, and Germany. And it was like the Tower of Babel. Everyone spoke a different language. It was a lot of fun because there wasn't a moment that we weren't, I mean, we were working really hard, but we also were going out because it was Barcelona. We were having dinner at 11 o'clock at midnight, every night. And I think a fun moment for me, it was a bit silly, but it was a fun moment was I was in the studio. We were building something, and it was a multi-day shoot. I don't remember how long, but I think we shot for at least 3-4 days, at least that much, or maybe 5. I mean, I think there was like a whole shoot week involved. And I was in the studio, and Justin came in with Cameron Diaz, with Cameron Diaz, because I think he was dating Cameron at the time, and she saw me, and we're not friends, but she just knew me from Saturday Night Live because she'd been on the show, and I think it was just a friendly or recognizable face, and she literally ran across the studio and gave me a big hug and said, "It's so good to see you. I heard the sets look great, and now I know why," which I thought was just the sweetest thing. But the reason I remember it mostly is because my crew, who had still yet to make out who I was and whether or not, they should even be paying attention to me at all. It was like, oh, so Cameron upped my my credibility enormously at that moment. I think it was day 1 or 2, so that was very useful. So even Saturday Night Live, in a way, came over there with me in a certain way.
For sure. Well, thanks for that.
Absolutely. Hey, Keith, the gratitude and appreciation really connecting with you tonight is off the charts. Kind of final question for me is, all right, you're in production week, you're in show week. At the end of the race, at the end of the marathon, it's Saturday night. It's 11:30 p.m. The show's going live. What is Keith doing?
Generally speaking, I'm always on the floor for the cold open. It's usually a last minute thing and is being set up for, the other sets, although a lot of them set in strike, they're a little more, they've been seen a few times and they're kind of like, they're secure. But the cold open tends to be, could have been a very last minute thing, or the flags need to be placed for Johnny's camera or something, so I'm usually on the floor for that. If there's a particular music group or music act that I like, I'll usually be there around for that. And otherwise, very often, my friend Mary Ellen Matthews and I will go up to the conference room and watch the show a little bit and have tequilas lately. So that's kind of it, because I don't, basically once the show is on, it's really the stage managers, it's their show, and it's the crew's show. My job definitely is done. And I've often left right after the cold open, and if it wasn't like an after party I wanted to get. Well, last year's a perfect example of I just went home every day, every time, It's because there was nothing to do. But that's really it. I am on the floor for dress rehearsal, because that's when we get to see that everything's, how it's going to work and where everything belongs. So I may still be working with the crew on where certain things are going to get placed and making sure it looks okay. But once we're at air, my job's definitely done.
That's
cool.
awesome.
Very cool.
Keith, I really can't thank you enough for all the time being so generous with us today. Is there any final thoughts or anything that you would love to let the listeners of Saturday Night Live know about you or any of the wonderful people that you work with at the show? Just wanted to open that to you at the end of our show.
That's very nice. We won. The only thing I can think of is that we won an Emmy this year, which was nice. And I think when I got up to receive it, it had occurred to me, and it was it's not that I hadn't thought of it before this, but because of COVID and all that happened, and of course losing Hal, which was so devastating. But finding out how important this show is to people. I know it sounds, how do I put this? When you work on something, you're not always aware of what it is to other people. It's kind of, Lenny Pickett and I are on our 729th show, I think. I think it's been. I think his wife kept track, not me, by the way. But I think it was. He recently told me. I think we're on 729 now because Lenny and I came at the exact same time. And when you do something for that long, and it's just part of your life, you're not the audience. You're not the people. It means something to you. It means something to me. It means a lot to me. It's been obviously a major part of my life, and and my family as well. But it was during this time when things were so bad that I really got to find out what we are to people, and I was a little surprised, but I was so grateful to know that the work we had done and the work that I got to be a part of meant so much to so many people. And I'm just very grateful for that.
That's great. I mean, like I said, very grateful to get to talk to you and hear all of your amazing stories this week. Keith, I'm just going to wrap the show if you don't mind.
No, please.
yeah, for sure. I would like to invite all of our listeners to make sure to never miss out on any of our content. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and we hope to be back with more SNL stories very, very soon. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at the SNL Network to check out all the content we're doing. Oftentimes, like I said, we get to repost a lot of things that Keith actually puts on his Instagram. He puts these wonderful behind-the-scenes photos up there. So we always like to promote the wonderful work of all the people behind the scenes at Saturday Night Live. And of course, if you're watching this right at the end of the week as we head towards the Gerard Carmichael and Gunna episode, we will be back on Saturday night right after the show at 1:10 a.m. for the Hot Take Show with a great panel to break down all the sketches from this week of Saturday Night Live. So I hope you will join us live on YouTube for that one. James, thank you very much. Always appreciate getting to talk to you.
Always a pleasure, John. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. And thank you so much, Keith.
Okay. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
We will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.